The War of Jenkins' Ear. In 1731, British merchant Robert Jenkins was sailing near the coast of Spanish Florida when his ship was stopped by the Spanish Coast Guard. The Spanish suspected smuggling, and in the heat of the moment, they cut off Jenkins' ear as punishment. Jenkins brought his severed ear back to Britain, where he presented it to Parliament in a jar, claiming it symbolized Spanish brutality. British politicians saw this as an opportunity to challenge Spanish dominance in the Caribbean. In 1739, Britain declared war on Spain, leading to a major conflict across the Caribbean and South America. One of the largest battles was the Battle of Cartagena de Indias, where Britain sent 186 ships and over 27,000 men to capture a major Spanish city in Colombia. However, the Spanish defenders, despite having only 3,600 troops, held their ground, and the British suffered a massive defeat, losing 20,000 men, mostly to tropical diseases. The war lasted until 1748, but ultimately resolved nothing, as Spain continued dominating the Caribbean trade routes. Britain had started a global war over a single ear, but in the end, it changed nothing. The War of the Oaken Bucket. The cities of Modena and Bologna had been rivals for centuries, but no one expected a war to start over a wooden bucket. One night in 1325, Modenese soldiers raided Bologna. During the raid, they stole a wooden bucket from a public well, mocking their rivals. Enraged, Bologna declared war and gathered an army of 32,000 men to invade Modena. The Modenese, though heavily outnumbered with just 7,000 troops, refused to give in. The two sides met at the Battle of Zappolino, one of the largest battles of medieval Italy. Despite its numbers, Bologna suffered a devastating defeat. Over 2,000 of their men were killed, and Modena's forces marched deep into Bolognese territory. As a final humiliation, they stole another bucket before leaving. To this day, the original stolen bucket is still displayed in Modena's town hall as a war trophy. The Pig War. The United States and Britain were disputing the San Juan Islands, a small but strategic territory between British Canada and Washington State. In 1859, a British farmer's large black pig kept wandering onto an American settler's farm and eating his potatoes. Frustrated, the settler Lyman Cutler shot the pig. When British authorities demanded Cutler pay for the pig, tensions escalated. The U.S. responded by sending 66 soldiers under Captain George Pickett, while Britain deployed 2,140 troops and 5 warships. For weeks, both sides stood ready for battle over the death of a single pig. Fortunately, diplomacy prevailed, and the dispute was settled without a single shot fired, except the one that killed the pig. The Soccer War. Football can be intense, but in 1969, it literally started a war. The countries of El Salvador and Honduras had been facing growing tensions over immigration, land disputes, and economic struggles. But what pushed them over the edge was a series of World Cup qualifying matches between their national teams. The final match, played in Mexico City, ended with El Salvador winning 3-2. That same night, riots broke out in both countries, and angry mobs attacked opposing fans and businesses. Just 2 weeks later, on July 14, 1969, El Salvador launched a full-scale military invasion of Honduras. For 4 days, both sides bombed cities, fought dogfights in the air, and engaged in brutal ground combat. Despite its small size, El Salvador had better trained troops and made rapid advances. However, due to international pressure from the Organization of American States, OAS, a ceasefire was declared. The war left over 3,000 people dead, mostly civilians in the end. The match that was supposed to unite people ended up tearing two nations apart. The Pastry War. In the 1830s, Mexico was in political turmoil, and lawlessness ran rampant. French businessman Monsieur Remontel, who owned a pastry shop in Mexico City, claimed that Mexican soldiers had looted and destroyed his shop. He demanded 600,000 pesos in compensation, an outrageous sum. When Mexico refused, France sent warships and blockaded the entire Mexican coast in 1838. Mexico, unable to fight back effectively, suffered heavy damage to its ports and trade. Finally, after several months of fighting, Mexico surrendered and agreed to pay Remontel and other French businessmen reparations. What started as a demand over a pastry shop ended in a full-scale war between two nations. The War of the Stray Dog. In 1925, tensions between Greece and Bulgaria were already high due to border disputes. One day, a Greek soldier's dog ran across the border into Bulgaria. When the Greek soldier chased after it, Bulgarian border guards shot him dead, believing it was an invasion attempt. In response, Greece invaded Bulgaria, capturing several villages near the border. The League of Nations quickly intervened, forcing Greece to withdraw and pay compensation to Bulgaria. The war lasted only 10 days, but over 50 people died, all because of a stray dog. The Nika riots. In 532, during the reign of Emperor Justinian I, chariot racing was the most popular sport in Constantinople. Two main factions, the Blues and the Greens, had turned into political enemies. One day, after a controversial race, riots broke out and the crowd began chanting, "Nika, victory," demanding the overthrow of Justinian. For 5 days, the city was in chaos. Over 30,000 people flooded the streets, burning churches and palaces. Justinian, initially considering fleeing, instead ordered his top general Belisarius to crush the rebellion. In the end, over 30,000 rioters were massacred, and Constantinople was left in ruins. The Cod Wars. For nearly 2 decades, Britain and Iceland fought over fishing rights in the North Atlantic in a series of conflicts known as the Cod Wars. Though no official battles took place, the confrontations were tense, involving naval standoffs, ship collisions, and economic threats. In 1958, Iceland extended its exclusive fishing zone from 4 to 12 nautical miles, angering British fishermen. Britain refused to recognize the new boundary, sending Royal Navy warships to protect its fishing fleets. The Icelandic Coast Guard responded by using net cutters, devices designed to sever the fishing lines of British trawlers, forcing them to retreat. In 1972, Iceland pushed the boundary even further, to 50 nautical miles, causing another round of confrontations. Dozens of vessels were damaged in ramming incidents, and tensions escalated when Iceland threatened to close a key NATO base used by the US. By 1975, Iceland extended its zone yet again, to 200 nautical miles, making Britain furious. This final conflict saw Icelandic and British ships intentionally ramming into each other in an effort to force the other side to back down. The Royal Navy eventually withdrew, and Britain agreed to recognize Iceland's territorial waters, effectively ending the war in 1976. Though it may have seemed like a minor dispute, the Cod Wars completely reshaped modern fishing laws, leading to the exclusive economic zones we have today. The War of the Golden Stool. The British had already colonized the Ashanti Empire by 1900, but one final dispute erupted into war, all because of a sacred throne. The Golden Stool was no ordinary throne. It was believed to be sent from the heavens and symbolized the unity and spirit of the Ashanti people. When British Governor Frederick Hodgson arrived in Kumasi, he demanded to sit on the Golden Stool, believing it was just another royal chair. The Ashanti were outraged. To them, this was an unforgivable insult, and they quickly organized a massive armed rebellion. Under the leadership of Asante Wa, a powerful Ashanti queen, thousands of warriors laid siege to the British fort in Kumasi, trapping 800 British soldiers and civilians inside for months. Despite their bravery, the British eventually broke the siege, thanks to reinforcements from West African colonial troops. By the end of the war, over 2,000 Ashanti warriors and 1,000 British troops had died. However, the British never found or captured the Golden Stool. The Ashanti people hid it deep in the forests. Though the war ended in defeat, the Ashanti never allowed their sacred symbol to be defiled. Today, the Golden Stool remains in Ghana, still revered by the Ashanti people. The Emu War. In 1932, Australia faced a massive infestation of emus, flightless birds that were destroying farmland in Western Australia. After years of failed attempts to control the emus, the government decided to take extreme action. They sent soldiers armed with machine guns to eliminate the birds. At first, the soldiers expected an easy victory. However, the emus proved to be incredibly difficult targets. They could run at speeds of 50 kilometers per hour, 30 miles per hour, and change direction unpredictably, making it nearly impossible to shoot them. Over several days, the soldiers fired over 10,000 bullets, but managed to kill only about 1,000 emus. Meanwhile, the remaining 20,000 emus continued to devastate farmland. In frustration, the government eventually called off the operation, effectively surrendering to the emus. The failure was so embarrassing that it became an international joke. One Australian official later commented, "The emus have proven that they are the superior military force." To this day, the EMU War remains one of the most bizarre military failures in history, and the emus, they're still roaming Australia victorious.